In our decarbonized future, how will we power aviation? Without fossil fuels spewing CO2 into the upper atmosphere, every commercial plane in the world would be grounded. We're going to have to rethink how we cross continents and oceans without wrecking our climate. Hi, I'm Andy Silber, and welcome to Decarbonize. This is part 2 in my series on aviation. In part 1, I discussed how planes are getting more fuel efficient. But even if they're burning half as much kerosene, that's still too much. But how else can we fly? Here I'll discuss one approach to a low-carbon aviation future, which I call the easy way. In my next video, I'll discuss the hard way. And to be clear, the easy way isn't necessarily the best way. We can break the aviation ecosystem into 3 groups: the plane manufacturers, the airlines, including pilots and mechanics, and the fuel suppliers. There are other elements like airports and regulatory authorities like the FAA and passengers, but we'll ignore them for now. So what is the easy way? Most people call it Sustainable Aviation Fuels, or SAF. This term refers to hydrocarbons that can be used as fuel for current planes, but are made without fossil fuels. The reason that this is the easy way is that only one of the stakeholders needs to change what they're doing. The manufacturers build the same planes, and the pilots need no retraining. There might be some minor changes in maintenance procedures, but nothing fundamental. Only the fuel manufacturers need to adapt. I'm not going to get into the details of the technology of manufacturing SAF. They all start with the feedstock, which is a material that is plant-based. It might be woody biomass, waste oil, or algae. The feedstock then goes through some kind of processing that results in a liquid fuel that can be mixed with standard aviation fuel. Currently, no SAF is approved to power an airplane at 100%. They all need to be mixed at between 5 to 50% SAF, with the remainder kerosene. And burning SAF still results in CO2. It's just that a plant extracted the carbon from the atmosphere recently, so it's a net zero fuel. The Biden administration launched a challenge in 2021 to supply at least 3 billion gallons of SAF annually by 2030, a steep jump from the current 15.8 million gallons. Even at 3 billion gallons annually, that's only 1/8 of the aviation fuel used in the U.S. U.S. jet fuel currently costs less than $3 per gallon, while SAF prices are at around $7 a gallon. Even with a $1.25 per gallon tax credit, SAFs are expensive. Until prices come down to near parity, SAF will be mixed in at small amounts. 1% SAF won't impact ticket prices, but 50% would. The 12% SAF that the Biden administration is targeting will only be possible with an enormous increase in production capacity, as well as a significant drop in price, or up to $12 billion a year in subsidies. And even then, it will only drop the emissions by about 10%. If the feedstock is waste, then it's hard to process. If it was easy to process, we would already be doing that. So it will always be expensive, though research may drive the price down. And there's a finite amount of waste, so this approach is unlikely to meet even 50% of our aviation fuel needs. You could use an easier to process feedstock like sugar or corn, but then you'll be displacing prime agricultural land that should be used to grow food. That would not be sustainable. Algae is an interesting feedstock since it can be grown in tanks anywhere with relatively few inputs. United Airlines has invested $5 million and Exxon $600 million in Viridis, which is growing microalgae for SAF and other biofuels. They've yet to deliver any fuel, but their approach does scale if they can get their costs down. And since SAF needs to be mixed with fossil fuel, it's not a path to decarbonization, just reduced emissions. I'm not one to let the perfect be the enemy of the good, but we should keep our eyes and research money on where we need to go, full decarbonization. Let's look at our history and ask, have we tried biofuels before and did they help? Starting during the oil crisis of the 1970s, there have been a series of mandates and subsidies to put corn ethanol in gasoline. Most gasoline in this country is about 10% ethanol. To create ethanol, we grow corn, which is processed into ethanol. About 40% of the U.S. corn crop is used not for food, but for fuel. This works out to about 36 million acres of land to provide about 10% of the fuel needed for cars. Obviously, this is not a scalable solution. Growing and processing this corn impacts the environment. The dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico is caused by fertilizer runoff, some of which comes from growing corn for ethanol. And the manufacturing of fertilizer releases CO2, as do tractors used to harvest the corn. There's some debate on whether or not corn ethanol is better than fossil gasoline, but if it is, it's not a slam dunk. If we covered the land used to grow corn for ethanol with solar panels, we could generate over 10 times the total electricity used in the U.S. This is because solar panels convert about 22% of light energy into something useful. For corn, less than 1% of the energy in the light is stored in the kernel, and that needs to be processed to become something useful. So biofuels are an inefficient way to capture solar energy. I'm not suggesting that we use prime agricultural land to build solar farms, but there may be a better way to capture the energy our society needs than biofuels. About 10 years ago, cellulosic ethanol was to be the silver bullet. The idea was to process the parts of food crops that weren't food to generate ethanol. By using waste products, we would stop diverting acreage. Unfortunately, the cost never came down to an acceptable level. So when I hear talk of making significant amounts of SAF from agricultural waste, I get a bit of deja vu. The direct and indirect subsidies paid out are in the tens of billions, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars. Just one tax credit is estimated to cost the Treasury over $3 billion per year from 2018 to 2022. And for what? A marginal decrease in carbon emissions and an increase in food prices and the size of the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. Not a great return on investment. So as we look at SAFs, it's important to acknowledge our 50-year-long experiment in biofuels for cars has been an expensive diversion that has not fundamentally decreased the environmental impact of automobiles. And when I look at SAFs that are being mixed in, they are unacceptably expensive. Might R&D lower the cost in the future? Sure, maybe. Who knows? I'm supportive of a research initiative, but rather than subsidizing SAFs, we should introduce a cost on carbon that would help SAFs compete on a level playing field. That is at least fiscally sustainable. This will increase the cost of flying, but maybe that's what's needed until we have a real zero carbon fuel. One thing I wouldn't do is ramp up the production of SAFs that don't make sense. We should make it clear to those trying to develop innovative clean fuels that if they meet certain goals on price and environmental impact, there will be a market. But until they meet those goals, we should keep it at a pilot stage, like SAFs currently are. They kind of strike me as an attempt to do something the easy way, but not necessarily the right way. We need to decarbonize aviation, and it's hard to imagine a solution other than SAFs. But that doesn't mean they'll actually work. Next, I'll talk about the hard way, which will require significant changes to the entire airline industry, but might actually be a path to true decarbonization. If you've learned something from this video, please like and subscribe, and please share your thoughts in the comments. Also, I've set up a Buy Me a Coffee page if you feel like supporting my work, though I'd actually prefer a beer to a coffee. You'll find a link in the description. And share with anyone you know who flies a lot.